r/NoSleep. Posted by u/inletharn. The world beyond my door is bursting with madness. I don't remember when it all began. To be honest, I'm losing the track of time, and perhaps the feeling of what's real. My days are smudged into a single blurry mess and I've abandoned all hope to escape this eternal nightmare. But I'm a fighter by nature, so no. The most obvious exit is not an exit at all. That's what the world expects of me, and I refuse to give it the pleasure. One regular day, probably couple of years ago, I was leaving for work. As I picked up the keys from the bowl and walked outside, I immediately felt an oppressive sense of unnatural dread. I can't say what exactly was wrong with the regular picture I happened to see millions of times before, it just felt somehow wrong. My stomach shrunk and the sour taste of saliva spread in my own mouth. Sun was shining, couple of birds chirping on a tree nearby, the kids shouting at the playground, as if nothing ever changed. But the sludgy feeling of threat nested deep inside. I retreated back into the comfort of my apartment and hyperventilated for a brief moment. Was that a panic attack? I tried to analyze why my primal instincts kicked in. Gasped for a couple deep breaths and decided to give it a second try. With door opened and a foot over my threshold, I froze as if pinned by mysterious force. Not an inch further, no matter the try. Drips of sweat started to form, as I relentlessly focused all my will at the sole of my shoe, trying to make it move. I left the attempt and went down on my couch, leaving my shoes on. What the hell was happening to me? I called the office and took a day off, saying I had some light cold symptoms. After that I just sat there thinking and listening to my body for a while. Nothing seemed to be wrong. I can't say I was under enormous stress lately. On the contrary, we got some praises recently and my team was ahead of schedule. I never had any agoraphobia symptoms and nobody in my family had any mental records. This made no sense. But let's give it that, things happen. I've decided to enjoy my day off and spend the time by doing things I enjoy the most. That would soothe the nerves and clear my mind. As the evening settled, I've decided to give it a third try and get some snacks from the store. Nope. As soon as I'd made the attempt, my whole being would malfunction, as if trying to fence me off from something inevitable. Next day the story repeated. And the next day. And the day after. I realized that at this pace I'd run out of food soon. Thank heavens we are living in the modern age. If it weren't the delivery companies, I would starve way back then. At some point I decided to give a call to a psychologist and ask a couple of questions about my condition. The specialist I got to listen carefully for all I had to say and asked some pretty obvious things about my medical history, child traumas and cases of severe agoraphobia in my family's history. By the end of the phone call she advised to call a psychiatrist instead and probably book a general practitioner to check me at home. Well, I'm not crazy. I'm probably developing some sort of phobia based on intensity of modern day life, but general checkup, why not? So I've called to a private clinic and asked for help. Next day the help arrived. She introduced herself as Dr. Hyder, ran some tests on me with a flashlight and that rubber-tipped hammer, as well as she took my blood sample for a test. When I was showing her out, in an off-the-record chat, she stated that my overall health looks perfect, but she would give a proper conclusion after running the blood test. She called 2 days later to tell me the good news: there was absolutely nothing wrong with me, physiologically speaking. I thanked her and hanged the phone. Maybe the psychiatrist was my only option left? And while I was thinking, the first screams started. I've heard horrific cries that must have been human, but I really doubt that a regular throat of a Homo sapiens could bear the power and the pain they carried. I freaked out, covering the ears with my palms. It sounded like the wails were coming from all directions at once. I've listened closely. A cacophony of voices came from behind the walls, the ceiling, the floor. As if the whole building block was full of agonizing human beings. I ran to a window and peered outside. Nobody on the street paid no attention to the nightmare unfolding before me. A kid, who was probably 4 or 5, was playing in the sandbox. He must have sensed my stare, as he looked up at me and smiled. I swear to God, at some second, by the corner of my eye as I was starting to look away, his face twitched slightly. The night was unbearable. The screams. They never stopped. I had to do something, but what? Picking up the hammer and all the blankets, sheets and pillows, I've tried to soundproof the living room as well as I could. It did help a lot, but that was just the beginning. Visions came next. And when I say visions, I don't mean that I literally saw things, no. I started to notice the glitches, as I call them. Nothing serious, you would never notice unless pointed directly. Like, for example, the oak that grew in front of my window unexpectedly was perfectly aligned by the laws of symmetry. It had identical curves of the paired branches at perfect angles on all visible sides. Or the sparrows. There were always 4 of them as I looked outside, no matter what time of the day or the window I looked through. This was getting out of hand. Then the calls started. First one woke me up in the middle of the night. I sensed the phone vibrating on the table before I took out the earplugs that became necessity regarding the conditions I've been through. I checked the screen, caller unknown, and picked up. Yes? I've spit out with my sleepy yet irritated voice, as I rubbed my eyes with fingers. Yes. Yes? Yes, replied the giggling voice in my ear. Yes, and I threw the phone over the room, as the sound rapidly started to become so highly pitched, that it almost hurt my ear. I never picked up unidentified calls since then. Not that I had many others. My parents used to call me a couple of times per month, they still did, but they sound strange. Making a pause after each word, as if putting a full stop. Continuing sentences word by word after each other, making weird intonations. Hello, son. How is your day? Good? Right. I checked the news on both TV and websites daily. The life continued as if nothing happened. It just went on. And I was sitting here, a prisoner of force I had no explanation to. I was clearly going mad. With grief on my heart and the burden of being a human failure that was going to end his life in a mental institution, I called the same private clinic and asked if I could book a visit from psychiatrist. I gave up. Mr. Morgan came in later that day. We talked for a couple of hours. That noble senior man with a luxurious silver mustache listened to every word I had to say and constantly took notes on my misfortune. He didn't even raise a brow when I talked about screams and visions and twitching faces, as if he heard about this hundreds times before. He promised to get to the very root of it and I never heard from him again. That booking was freaking expensive, you know. I've called the clinic several times trying to get information, or at least, get my money back. Living on my savings was quite a move already and I couldn't afford wasting funds like that. But all I had in my speaker was just hissing sound and screeching laugh. Actually, now as I think of it, I don't remember anybody from work calling me since day one. I never got the notice of resignation, which I expected to be an email, but who knows, maybe a paper copy was piling in my mailbox downstairs. One day, as I was getting the delivered food from front door, and I had the whole system there, sometimes the courier left it closer to the outer wall, so that it couldn't get kicked with the door being opened and I had to use a hockey stick to pull it closer, which sometimes resulted in some goods rolling all over the floor, at distance I was unable to reach, and sometimes I used a broom and a mirror when the package was set aside. Anyway, one day I noticed that the wall was covered with meaty vines and sickly yellowish flowers. They emanated the horrible smell of burning plastic. Soon my whole apartment smelled like it. I always waited at least 20 minutes after the delivery guy rang the doorbell. Why? At first I thought it would be nice to make contact and have a chat with a random stranger, but once there was no guy. Just a pair of uniform, with nothing but skin puppet inside. I have no better name for it. The thing had no mouth, nostrils, hair, ears. Just a mannequin-like creature wearing uniform. It just stood in front of me for a second, then turned and walked away, leaving me horrified. So yes, that's what my life has become, a kaleidoscope of horrors, never-ending screams, stenching plants and illogical patterns behind the windows. But you know what was the worst? The loneliness. Back in the days, when everything was rather normal, I was quite a social guy, I had many friends, I was respected by my colleagues, I was popular among the ladies, shit, even kids loved me. Now I was all alone. Nobody called me, not a single person paid me a visit to check if I was alright and wonder why'd I go radio silent. Trust me, I tried. I called my best friends just to hear some demonic sounds in the speaker. I tried video calls, and even though some picked it up, just more sounds and blurry images of eyes, teeth and limbs in an ever-changing flood of constantly altering visions. I tried texting, but once I've hit the submit button, everything I've typed in turned to a gibberish of symbols and emojis. And the messages I got from other people looked the same. One day, as I've got my delivery and was about to cook some fried eggs, I understood the world is leaving me no chance. The egg I've cracked had something purple, covered in green and blue blisters, solid and mushy at the same time. Whole pack was irrationally messed up. I grabbed a loaf of bread, and it stared back at me, as if laughing to my face. That was it. I've panicked. I felt vulnerable to my core. I had nowhere to run. I had no one who could help me. And as if the world sensed my misery, I suddenly found myself standing in complete silence. The screams stopped. I looked outside, no sparrows guarding me, just a single crow cleaning its feathers on a branch of a perfectly normal tree. I trembled. What was the meaning of this? Was that salvation or the eye of the storm? My wobbly legs brought me to the front door, sticky sweat dripping from each pore of my now skinny body. I've put my hand onto the handle and pushed. The sun was shining in the blue sky, partially covered with soft clouds. I heard the neighbors talking about something as they headed towards elevator. I concentrated all my will and pushed my foot towards the threshold. And nothing happened. I was standing 1 foot in the world outside. I felt crying the sweetest tears of happiness I ever had in my life. I was cured. I was safe. I shouted like crazy. Suddenly the light on my face got dimmer. I raised my eyes expecting to see a bigger cloud covering the sunshine, but as seconds passed I realized that the sun was turning around to reveal a huge eyeball with a X-shaped pupil. It happened so fast. It was staring at me. I was noticed. And then the emitting light became unbearable, burning me down, bathing my body in a nova of light. That was it. I woke up in a hospital. As my nurse, Ms. Hyder, explained, there was a huge gas leak in the building where my place was, and I'd been lucky enough to stand directly in the door frame when the explosion happened. Then Dr. Morgan visited and explained that I've been in a coma for past 2.5 months, but now I am getting better and he thought I would totally recover in a matter of weeks. I temporarily moved back to my parents' house where I occupy my old bedroom now. I gave a call to my office and they are happy that it all turned out fine. I am able to work from home up to a point when I recover both physically and financially. All seems great and back to normal. I began to forget all the horrible things I saw back there. But this night I awoke screaming, as visions of hell I've been through found their ways into my dreams. I must have awakened my mom and dad. Now, as I am typing this to tell you my story, as I start to notice that the separate letters in the text start to change into random symbols, I hear my parents standing outside my room knocking at the door and asking all the time. "Hello, son? How is your sleep? Good? Right.